Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another week beyond the trailer park. A little light this week, but that's okay. Tracy has a sick little one to tend to, and Morgan has a research assignment that landed on her lap this afternoon that she's rather grumbly about. But that's the life of a student, unfortunately. So they won't be with us this week, but joining us from the wilds of Pennsylvania as usual. Good evening, Beth.
Howdy, howdy.
How's life over there? I haven't started to freeze yet.
Yeah, we had snow that sort of stuck for about 2 hours. Today was fairly decent for late fall, but I don't go out much, so it don't bother me. The farthest I gotta go is out the back door and in the back door of the restaurant. So.
Well, we had snow that stayed for, I don't know, like 4 days because we've had unseasonably cold weather, like minus 11 already.
Ooh.
Yeah.
We've had a couple cold nights.
That's in Connect temperature, Bill.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
Speaking of Bill, joining us over from the desert of Arizona. Good evening, Bill Ludlow.
Hi, how are you guys?
We're good. We're good. Yeah,
Glad to be here.
That's Connect temperature, so it sounds a lot worse to you than it is.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's fucking cold. Yeah. Oh. But that's all right, I guess. I mean, I hate winter. I'm a shitty Canadian, Bill. I hate winter with a passion. I don't like hockey and a bunch of other Canadian things too. So, yeah. What I know Steve McRae was talking about Canadians trying to get through and he should build a wall. I'm like, yeah, I'm probably going to get deported from my own country at some point. So, if you got any room over there. But I love America. Don't think I could ever live there. Sorry.
I don't blame you.
So, Bill, you work at, you volunteer at the Arizona Museum of Natural History, and
correct.
What is it exactly? You're interpreter or something?
Well, yeah, the official title would be Origins Gallery Interpreter. Sounds fancy. The Origins Gallery is really about deep time. It's about movements of the continents, plate tectonics, and evolution. As far as human evolution is really featured in that gallery too, and that's what I do. We don't have really a permanent human evolution display. The only thing permanent in the room is a Ardipithecus, and but we have a table that we set up, myself and other volunteers, different days, and we speak about human origins using different skulls and artifacts and things like that, going back about 3.5 million years. And what I do is I not only do I volunteer 1 to 2 days a week doing that, I also volunteer at special events for them. I'll be at the Mesa Arts Center this morning with a large group of children that's coming in. And I also train the other people on the human origins at the museum too.
Oh, cool. And you sometimes
so basically you're a public educator.
Yeah, I'm an educator, science educator, and that's a good description of what I do.
Sometimes wizard, right?
Right. Yeah, I dressed up. We had what was called a weird science night, the Friday the 13th before Halloween, and I had made a while back. In fact, I used it, I believe, during my debate with Hovind, but I had made a poster of what I did was I went back and looked over the last few million years, and at what point in our history did we have the most hominins alive that we know of at the same time? And it ended up being like 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. depending on how you want to look at it, between 7 to 9 different species, let's say, from Homo naledi in South Africa to Homo floresiensis in Flores, island of Flores in Indonesia, to Neanderthals, to archaic modern Homo sapiens. And there were all these different types of humans alive at the same time. So I had made this poster. And someone got the idea, the director of education there, that we should use that, especially since it features the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis, during this weird science night, to kind of liken it maybe to Tolkien's Middle Earth.
Yeah.
And it just is something just to interest the children, to get their attention. So I did. I dressed up as a wizard with my staff and everything. And I manned the table, but I had help with the table. So I would now and then I would walk through the museum holding the Hobbit skull in my hand, asking if anybody has seen my other Hobbit, So it worked. It got a lot of attention from the kids, and
that's awesome.
And it worked out really well. So yeah.
And you wear a cowl very well, I must say.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
and the staff works really well too, I gotta say.
Yep.
So you do a lot of your work would be with kids coming to the museum, I would imagine.
Yeah, and we focus on that. I mean, each week we get an email from the volunteer coordinator that gives us projected numbers coming into the museum, and that's based on like field trips and scheduled groups. And luckily, these field trips and scheduled groups are all between, say, 10 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon, because it's during school time. So we're able to, my normal day schedule would be Wednesday, and it seems to be a real good day on average for the field trips. But if there's going to be 400 kids coming in on a Thursday, I may also go down and help out, just so that we can kind of maximize the contact that we have in discussing human origins. So.
No, this is great. And what I think is really important about that is, as you know, and I've encountered, a lot of creationists target children. So being there as an educator for children with actual facts, I think is so important, because they really do, they know that the sort of 6 to 10 age range is really good time to start indoctrinating, and they do their best to do that.
Absolutely. So, and they use dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Ken Ham's dinosaur billboards all over the place for the Creation Museum, and Kent Hovind with his dinosaur Adventureland. I mean, yeah. They know that kids are fascinated with dinosaurs, so they use that to bring them in and try to get their interest.
Well, Kent Hovind has actually said in quite a few of his presentations that he specifically uses dinosaurs for that reason, because he knows kids are a sucker for dinosaurs.
Yep.
Yeah, and what's so annoying is that if you don't have a interest in paleontology or in dinosaurs or even anthropology for that matter, you get lost in all his gobbledygook.
Well, and
that's like you said.
Yeah, like they say things that sound really scientific, and they sound really profound, and that because they can use big words that people don't maybe understand the meaning of. And like for myself, as I was saying to Bill, I'm like a science illiterate. I don't know a lot. I know the basics, but once people get into, the deeper aspects of things, I'm lost. So when somebody brings out a bunch of pseudoscience gobbledygook that sounds really impressive, I've got to do a lot of research before I would be able to decide whether what they're saying has any merit or not. And let's be honest, the average person you know, if somebody tells them something that sounds really authoritative, they're not apt to go out and be like, oh, well, I better go research that now to make sure that person's saying something that's true. They're going to be like, wow, that sounds really impressive. And they say they've got a bunch of degrees and stuff. So, yeah, I better believe it. Well, of course, you know, like Dr. Hovind has a quote doctorate in theology. And if anybody's ever looked at his doctoral thesis, which I have, I wrote better things in 7th grade. So, yeah, you know, you can put alphabet soup behind your name, but it doesn't mean you know what you're talking about.
Well, it's like I was telling you guys during pre-show is that part of the reason I wanted to have Bill on was that we're in some creationist groups, you know, same groups, and I ran into a discussion where I could only go so far and then I was stumped. And I'm not science illiterate. I'm maybe a little behind where I should be, but I don't have any type of official degree in any of the sciences. I mean, I have college level chemistry 2 years and physics forget. You know, I have, you know, 2 years of college biology, but that's it. Everything else I think I know is all self-taught. But I got to a point where I was like, I couldn't make heads or tails of what this person was really saying, but it didn't sound right, but I didn't know how to refute it. And I think one of the biggest things that, and I think Bill would agree with this, is if you go into a Hovind group specifically, and I'm picking on Hovind here because Bill and I are both in the same groups, over the course of time, the creationist rebuttals are just prats. I mean, over and over. I mean, and Bill, you actually commented about this the other day. I don't know if it was in Shit Creationists Say group or if it was actually in the Hovind group, that why am I refuting the same shit over and over and over again? That's what we run into, and what I'm finding is the more I'm hitting these quote junk rebuttals, the better I'm getting at them. But I still have to, I can't do it off the top of my head. You run into a creationist, especially in this group, they have these quote responses, like, you know, you were talking about the one debate we were trying to set up with one of the creationists a couple months ago, and he wanted to do the debate right then and there, and you're like, fuck no. We'll do it this date, yada yada. And he backed out because, you know, for you had to settle on one topic and one topic only, so he didn't do a gish gallop. So.
Well, and that was actually going to be in the rules of that particular debate, was no gish galloping allowed. And he didn't object to that outright, but I think had Foda, who was going to moderate, if he had put his foot down and started enforcing that rule, I think we would have seen a lot of whining. But we'll never know because that particular person is total coward. That was almost a year ago, by the way, Beth.
Oh, whoops.
That's okay.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I know. But yeah, that was never happened because that person didn't like being held to a set of parameters that didn't allow their hijinks. But speaking of hijinks and debates, Bill, you had the pleasure of debating Kent Hovind this summer, which was quite. I highly recommend folks watch that. I don't know if I would call it a debate, but that was quite the experience, I would imagine.
It was, yeah. Oh, and also I just saw the description for our show right now, and I just want to make sure people read that slowly. Infamous master debater. Don't read that very fast. So it won't sound right. So, okay,
Beth did that.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I think I first became aware of Mr. Hovind about 19 Yeah, probably 1996. Um, and like the year after I got internet, and I had stumbled into a creationism forum online type thing or whatever, and it was actually like a sub forum of something that was totally different. Um, and so I started hearing this and seeing this and stuff. So I've been familiar with his stuff for 20 years. Um, it hard. I mean, I had the advantage in that I was able to do the research and know what he was going to say because he hasn't changed what he said in 20 years. So,
Yeah.
I was able to do the research, and I was real careful that my opening presentation wasn't about him. It was about
Yes.
the evidence, the actual evidence there is for evolution. I took a couple opportunities to maybe mention what creationists say about it, but for the most part, I mean, I didn't really go there at all in that first 20, 22 minutes of the debate. Um, One of the reasons was I didn't want to be sucked into talking about the same things that he constantly brings up over and over and over. That was going
Yeah.
to be part of my presentation because it isn't evidence for human evolution, and it isn't anything that we bring up, let's say at the museum and discussing with children and stuff. Nobody talks about Piltdown Man. Nobody talks about Nebraska Man because they are basically um, not even worth talking about. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about things from 100 years ago. It's not evidence for human evolution, so I didn't bring it up. Of course I knew he would, but
Yes.
interesting. I had been trying for over a year to get him to debate. I had actually emailed him a couple times, and of course written to him on Facebook, different things, and I never actually picked up the phone and called him. Although somebody I know says they did, and he basically at that time said he was only interested in debating college professors. So, not being a college professor, I was not on his A list. I think it became after he'd been out of prison for a year or so
Yeah.
that just those types of debates weren't going to happen for him anymore. Um, and maybe he lowered the bar a bit, and he agreed to debate, I think one or two people, a couple people before me, and so
Yeah.
I was able to watch those debates and stuff too. Didn't want to go with such a broad range of topic, in debating him either, because he'll go off on all these different directions. I wanted to keep it real specific, because
Yes.
there was so much evidence to present. I mean, just for human evolution
Absolutely.
alone, and
And
only
here,
going back 3 million years. So
even if you only watch Bill's presentation at the beginning of that, it was really worth watching. You should, honestly, Bill, you should chop that part out and upload it yourself. I think
actually, I
it's
have. It's on my YouTube
good.
channel on Bill
Good, good.
Ludlow YouTube,
Excellent.
and it's titled "Evidence for Human Evolution." And like I said, I think it's like 21, 22 minutes long.
Yep.
And I do say in the description that this is the opening, statement for my debate with Kent Hovind. That a lot of people have requested that I upload that, and people are free to use it for educational purposes. So
No, it's quite good, and it's at a level where I think it's accessible to anybody, like any, even if you're new to, um, natural science or you're unfamiliar with it. I think you could still get a lot of value out of that. And
right,
like
and
you
it
said,
was. I didn't want to go too technical. Again, I see people. Um, in forums and different groups and things like that, getting down to super technical things like that, and I think you've lost people's interest at that point a lot of times. It's just
well,
it's beyond the average person's
like I've
ability to
said,
even care about that.
well,
So
exactly. Like I've said,
Well, I think what it
I've been
yeah,
in rooms with Steve, with the Great Debate Community, where some of those guys have PhDs and things, and they're talking about stuff that I'm like, what language is that now? And you're right. I completely glaze over and lose all interest because I don't understand
Mhm.
that stuff. Sorry, Beth.
I was going to say, going back to a point that you made about him dumbing down his debate, the scuttlebutt is that no academic will debate him. Basically, it's because they do not want to advance his agenda. And where my interest in Hovind beyond creationism and that whole debacle is his sovereign citizen bullshit, along with his peddling of B-17 and all that, is that they don't want to give him, he wants legitimacy. Although Ken Ham and Eric Hovind kind of sort of lean this way about wanting to debate big names because they want legitimacy, Hovind has to have it. Financial standpoint. In order to get Dino Land 2 off the ground, he needs money. So he's going to do whatever he can. And the scuttlebutt basically is people, like Dawkins and, people like that will not debate him. So what he had to do and what he started doing is basically anybody that has offered to debate him, and this is nothing against Steve and the Great Debate Channel, I think that's why you guys have been able to get him. I mean, this is just my opinion. And it in some ways it's sad, full disclosure. I used to be a Hovindite about 30 years ago. I sucked up everything this man had to say about creationism. I know Hovind from even, but the creation story, the whole Noah's Ark thing was like the first thing of my religious beliefs to go out the window, because like I think in one of my classes, Sunday school classes, I asked, well, how did all the animals fit on the ark? And they were like, oh, God works in mysterious ways. And that just kind of blew it for me, because I did the math and it came out to like 0.63 cubic meters per animal. And that's only based on like not the millions, not all the insects, just the land, the kinds.
Yeah.
So,
by the way,
Hovind's.
By the way, Bill, what the fuck is a kind?
It's basically anything they want it to be. I mean, if you go, you can go to a dozen different creationist websites and get a dozen answers. I mean, it can be anything from species to genus, family, anything. And it's just pretty much anything that they want it to be. Now, I think Answers in Genesis has now narrowed it down to around 1,500 kinds, but they say that there are 20-something bird kinds. See, I mean, when you look at, they say, oh, overall there's only this many, but then when they start looking at all these individual types that they start coming up, it doesn't jive at all. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, if there's 20-something bird kinds alone, that's just ridiculous. But they have to, because obviously penguins are so different from ostriches and sparrows that they can't justify super rapid evolution of a single kind into a penguin and a sparrow and an ostrich within 4,000 years. Well, I mean, actually within a short fraction of that, because we've known about ostriches and sparrows for thousands of years already. So
I would argue that's one of the most ridiculously nebulous terms in the whole damn Bible. Because you can, like you said, you can make it be whatever the hell you want it to be. It's just, and they twist it around. Like I've heard, oh, well, no, it was only 2 of every kind that was in the ark. So there was lots of space. What do you mean it was like millions of animals? No. Like, that doesn't make any sense, people.
Well, there was a meme that I saw, and it was based off a Hovind presentation where he said that a 5-year-old could tell you what a kind was. So they turned it around, and basically it was a banana, a monkey, a human, and a rock. and they asked, which is this, what are the same kinds, and or what is it? And she said, well, the rock. Well, basically, that answer proved that a monkey, a banana, and a human are all related.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back enough into the tree, well,
we are.
It's true. It's like they defeated their own they defeated their own supposition that were related to trees and bananas. But yeah, it's just like Bill said, it's very nebulous.
Kent had some other creative ideas, like you can't say that a fossil contributed to evolution unless you can prove that it procreated.
Yeah, I think the way he puts it is you can't prove that any of those bones in the dirt had offspring.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you could, you can't prove that it had offspring different than itself. I mean, which again is a complete misunderstanding of evolution.
Yeah. Do you think it's
every species will always give birth to the same species?
Do you think it's because these folks just aren't able to comprehend the vast amounts of time involved? Because, I mean, it's a lot of time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if you're a young Earth creationist and you actually believe the Earth is 6,000 years old, you cannot comprehend the amount of time that it actually would take. I mean, obviously, you can't comprehend that. It doesn't make sense to you. So, but I mean, the reason I think Kent's doing it is because his audience is not familiar with evolution either. And,
Yes.
and what we do teach. So he's creating a straw man, well, you can't prove that it had offspring. Okay, well, you're correct in there, but as pointed out in the debate 100 times probably, individuals don't evolve, populations evolve, and you have never found a single individual that wasn't a member of a population. I mean, unless it were the last one left, and how are we going to know that? So,
well,
but
I personally have not procreated and will not be procreating, so that doesn't mean that human beings as a species have now stopped evolving because I didn't procreate.
And the example he gave of Tom Hanks on the island was out there. I mean, that one blew me away. I mean, Tom Hanks was on an island, so that meant there were no humans anywhere else in the world at that time. Yeah.
But the funny part,
I think you guys.
Sorry, Beth. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think what's important to note with this is what exactly is evolution?
Yeah.
Defined so that in your case, child would understand it.
Because a lot of people, I think,
how would you define it?
Misunderstand.
Don't even know how to define it.
Yeah. Especially when they start talking about, well, you can't explain where the universe came from. Like, that doesn't have anything to do with evolution, you idiot. So
right, yeah, you see that falling back on all the time. I mean, as soon as you've got them to where you've explained what they asked or what they challenged, the next thing up is, well, you can't explain the origin of life, or you can't explain, who created the universe. Well, okay, those are the two things we got left. Yeah, they're going to jump to one of them all the time.
I know when I was doing some background research, according to Hovind, and I'm using him specifically, as I said, there are 6 definitions. And one of the videos I watched was done by Logic, who has a YouTube channel. Noted that when Hovind delves into his so-called 6 definitions of evolution, what he's doing is repurposing the term evolution. He's using it as an umbrella term, accepted scientific theory related to the history of life in the universe.
Right.
And as he notes, not everything in his, quote, definitions are evolutionary. He talks about cosmic evolution, which would be to us the Big Bang. That's not an evolutionary process. He talks about chemical evolution, which is nucleosynthesis, not an evolutionary process. He talks about stellar and planetary evolution, which would be star formation and planet formation. Again, not evolution. Then he talks about organic evolution, which would be abiogenesis. It's not an evolutionary process because evolution doesn't care how life began. Is once life is established, how did we get to where we are? And then he uses my two favorite terms, macroevolution and micro.
Yeah.
And
I wonder when we're going to get to that.
You know, basically, from everything I've read over the course of the last 20 years, there's really no such beast per se. They're the same processes, whether it's macro or micro. And basically, especially Hovind, uses those terms to muddy a scientific discussion.
Yeah.
Basically, all Hovind's doing is creating his own vocabulary. And I think, you know, you take that and compare it to a simple definition, you know, an individual inherits 2 alleles from each gene, i.e. one from each parent, in a population due to natural selection. That's the simple definition. I mean, that's what I'm used to. Not this.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, here's his definition. Now, can you see those?
Yes.
I don't know if that comes up on your screen or whatever, right? And you know, this is what I anticipated in his in my debate with him, and that's what he does. Exactly what she was saying. You know, he breaks up evolution into all these different meanings. Where at least, you know, during my discussion with him, we weren't going to any of those, but the last two, and that's specifically why I started with Australopithecus and went to Homo sapiens, because I don't think that anyone would argue that those are not two different kinds, no matter how you want to, you know, describe kinds. You know, we definitely were talking ape to human, so including micro and then of course macro, which I have heard scientists use that term. It isn't used a lot, but you know, I mean, it's used more in response to creationists than anything else. But I mean, that's really the way it's used now. I mean, so
that was the sense I was getting, because I know years ago when Hovind started using those terms, I'm like, I remember looking and looking and looking, and I could never find it anywhere. It's like, okay, but I've noticed that more and more it is being used, but always seems to be, as you said, in response to primarily Hovind. And basically, you know, macroevolution is the evolution you see, you know, on a larger scale. Microevolution is what they consider variation. And adaptation, if I'm getting this right. This is coming from my discussion I had the other day that I kind of got stumped on, because I had used the example of seeing evolution every day when I had MRSA. And, you know, almost 4 years now, I had a really bad bout of MRSA. I ended up going on 3 different courses of antibiotic to get rid of it. Well, that's evolution in action. Adaptation.
Yeah.
And that's where I got stumped, because I couldn't get past that. Like, okay, how do I, you know, combat that? Because, you know, some things I'm just not 100% clear on. I know it, but I didn't have the light bulb moment with it. I still haven't. But it's like, you know, and he does that literally to muddy the waters. And his minions, because this was in the Hovind group, his minions are picking up on this, and they know with certain people, myself being an example, that you get to we can only get to a certain point. We don't have the PhDs. We haven't studied evolutionary biology. And what's funny is, because of that, I'm now taking a class in evolutionary biology.
there are, talking
But
about taking classes too. There are a lot of online classes available. If people are interested in human evolution, there's an annual class taught by Donald Johanson, who of course discovered Lucy, through ASU, absolutely free to take. It's like about a 10-week course. That one is a lot tougher than some of the other courses that I've taken online. It does require to the videos and doing some homework and stuff, but there are a lot of tools. That one's through I think it's through EDX. Look through EDX and Coursera are two that are excellent online classes.
I've taken evolutionary biology through Coursera a
couple times. Yeah, I just finished a class in the origin of bipedalism on EDX, which was it was just about a 5-week class, and but again, really excellent. I mean, and I mean, I do it for my own benefit, to learn more about our human ancestry. That was a great course for that, especially for people that weren't familiar with bipedalism and what the different traits are. I mean, people think, well, the only way we know is by the foramen magnum or something, you know, but no, that's not true. I mean, not only is it the pelvis, it's the it's the angle of the femur, it's the shape of the foot. I mean, there are so many different ways, and that class really got into the interesting adaptations that we see on how we became bipedal, you know, the curved lower spine. I mean, there are like 7 major indicators of bipedalism. And what we see in, like, say, Australopithecus, and that is most of those. I mean, we see the curved lower spine, we see the shape of the pelvis, we see the angle of the femur, we see the type of heel, we see the foramen magnum. You know, with Lucy, let's say, for example, it's not just one thing. It's a whole combination of traits that we know. Now there are other species, say Sahelanthropus or even Ardipithecus, where we don't see all those traits. But then, you know, we see the beginnings of bipedalism. We might see that the foramen magnum's in the correct position, but you know, the feet are different. But again, that's to be expected. I mean, it didn't all happen at once. But by the time it got to Lucy, we can tell that they were bipedal.
Yeah.
My mindful in the Hovind group is that you have, like, you know, what you just described, you know, taking a class on bipedalism, and first of all, they would mock you for taking the class at all, because, you know, to them it's all just junk science. But like you said, it's not just one thing. There's 7 characteristics, but they totally ignore it. And this is something that Hovind, in my opinion, is really, really good at. And it's and it's not just Hovind. Kent Hovind does it. Matt Slick does it, although he does it with apologetics in general. Citations does it. He does it with apologetics in general. But any of your creationist, Sparrow up in Canada does it. Is that it's this whole anti-intellectualism.
Yeah.
They are totally against learning. I mean, and it was prevalent in Bill Nye's debate with Kent Hovind. I have this book. Yeah. That's what it came down to for them. And I think what really drove it home for me is that they are so against learning. In general, it doesn't matter whether it's about evolution or whatever. It could be, you know.
They think that, you know, Satan has taken over education, so it doesn't matter where you're being educated. If you're getting educated, it's just Satan whispering in your ear all the time, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
the one thing. Oh, sorry, Beth.
I was just gonna say, one of the memes that I saw recently, it's a little green robot thingy, and it says robust scientific argument, and then there's a science denier saying, "Yikes, I can't fight that, but I do have an idea," and he builds a quote straw man and starts beating it with what looks like a bat, and that's what we're constantly fighting about whether it's evolution or whatever.
Yeah.
I see it in the anti-vax community quite a bit. Which makes Hovind even doubly dangerous because he's also an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah. And one of the things he brought up that you talked about in the debate, Bill, that I'd never heard before that astounded me was the fact that earlier hominoids that had big brow ridges, that just meant that they were really, really old humans. I was like, what
Yeah,
the fuck?
there are a couple creationists that have used that for years. Was it Jack Cuomo, I think, the dentist from New York that supposedly did this big study on Neanderthals, and it turns out it's just absolutely a wives' tale. And the amazing thing is that we have people, they still believe it, but we have evidence of Neanderthal youths and teenagers with large brow ridges. I mean, fossil evidence of that. We know, we can tell. Course I took was in human osteoarchaeology, and we can tell by whether wisdom teeth have come in or not. We can tell by you know, whether the skull is fully closed. There's different ways of estimating, not exact but close ages, especially in younger specimens, that we know that these were children, yet they show Neanderthal traits. And that just totally exposes the myth that they get brow ridges as they grow older. I mean,
the other thing he said was, oh, you were ignoring the evidence of fossils that showed people were like 9-10 feet tall.
You know, I didn't even go there, and I couldn't. I was actually surprised that he endorsed giants. And you know, there was another thing that I've seen him brought up about Lucy possibly being alive and well and living in Sumatra, but those are things that are so out there. Her species, but he says Lucy. But those are things that are so out there that I wasn't, you know, I just didn't go down that road, because what else do you say other than you're nuts? I mean, there's absolutely no evidence for it.
Well, the whole giant Nephilim thing is a whole nother conspiracy theory in and of itself, and I can't believe he went there. Oh my God!
I mean, I've seen some of the photoshops of that, and they are so ridiculously obvious as
and
photoshops.
I see them shared, not a week or a month at least goes by before in a creationism group or the Hovind group or something where people will be sharing photoshops, obvious photoshops.
Well, and they know they're obvious photo. This is, I've kind of researched the whole Nephilim bullshit. I actually had to take a step back because it was getting so far out there that it was literally messing up my brain. I mean, it was really getting ouchy. But they know they're photoshops, but their reasoning for sharing them is, well, one, it could possibly be true, or two, oh, we're supposed to believe these are photoshops because this is really evidence. And in one group,
it's to look like a Photoshop to
even though you can produce the original. Yeah, I produced, in one or two of these, I produced the original contest photo from the website that put out a contest for the best photoshopped. And one of the categories was the Nephilim 6'4" giants. And it states right, I mean, there's watermarks on these photos, which is really bizarre. And they still take them as evidence.
Yeah.
That, and it's like, you can't compete with that. I mean, it's like, you know, it's like, and you get that with specifically with Hovind. I've seen it more, so I don't follow Ken Ham as much. I follow more of his theocracy bullshit. Where with Ham or Hovind, it's a whole conglomeration of things, but I've noticed you present legitimate, solid evidence I think it was Peter, had posted a whole list of citations to reputable journals, and they poo-pooed away like, doesn't mean anything. It's like, you can't fight with that. That's why I give you credit for debating him, because it's like, I would have that's why I don't debate, because I have no patience. And it's like I've said with apologetics, you're just arguing the same points over and over again, and they're not going to accept their evidence, like Dad was saying, with the girl presenting all her qualifications, and he's like, where's your evidence?
Yeah.
So it's like the Twitter meme that showed
citing a primary source apparently is not evidence.
Yeah. Well, they don't accept science at all.
No. Well, science is a big lie perpetrated by Satan, Oh, that's it. I should have worn my shirt today. I didn't think of it. I have the shirt with the picture of Satan burying the fossils that says "Teach the Controversy." I should have worn that shirt today. Oh, man.
But there is no controversy.
No. I think Satan's too busy doing other things to be burying fossils, Somebody's gotta hide all the keys that Jesus has to find,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, shit. But yeah, that one just blew my mind.
One of the biggest, I'd say one of the top 3 topics that come up in our group is C14 and radiometric dating.
I was going to ask about that, because they always say, oh, it's not accurate, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know enough about it to really...
And that's one of the issues I have, too, is that while I understand it, there's so much minutiae in the various methods of radiometric dating, because most creationists think it's only C14, which for those of us general science know is only good up to 50, maybe 60,000 years. So there's no way we can date dinosaur fossils by that. But they always say, so there's more to it than just C14.
Well, Bill, was it in your debate where, I'm trying to think now if it was Hovind that was trying to say carbon dating didn't work because on a live
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what it was is I had brought that up because I had and I wanted to introduce carbon dating into the debate. So I purposely mentioned carbon dating a couple times because I had prepared some slides prior to the debate of Kent's actual presentations that he's done, like his videos and that, where he has used a couple different things, where he used the, carbon dating of a live seal. It was wrong. It showed a couple thousand years old.
Right.
And then he also showed carbon dating of a snail, a living mollusk shell. And I mean, we know that there are exceptions to number one, we don't carbon date anything alive. I mean, that's just silly. It's got to be dead for at least 100 years for enough decay to happen. There's something called the marine reservoir effect, where marine animals, the amount of carbon-14 in the ocean is not the same as the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere. And so that has to be taken into account. And he's citing things from like the 1940s, and the early 60s, when they were still learning about marine reservoir effect and things like that. But again, he was using it to try to discredit the method, when those are ways of actually, we know now, using the method improperly. So he just couldn't seem to get it through his mind why that was wrong.
Well, to interject, and I'm going to put this in the show notes, is that the one claim is living mollusk shells were dated to being 2,300 years old. In actuality, the title of the paper is Radiocarbon Dating Fictitious Results with Mollusk Shells from 1963, and I'll have the link in the show notes. But basically what that paper showed is evidence is presented to show that modern mollusk shells from rivers can have anomalous radiocarbon ages.
Right.
As Bill mentioned, it's the reservoir effect. Another claim he makes, probably in the same video that I watched, his claim was a freshly killed seal carbon dated as having died 1,300 years ago. The actual paper is from Wakefield Dort Jr., 1971, mummified seals of southern Victoria land. It's in the Antarctic Journal, and this is from the abstract. The paper is not free. I couldn't get my hands on it, at least not yet anyways. Basically, the summary is radiocarbon analysis of specimens obtained from mummified seals in southern Victoria land has yielded ages ranging from 615 to 4,600 years. However, Antarctic seawater has significantly lower carbon-14 activity than accepted as the world standard. Again, reservoir effect, basically. His third claim he made in that video was that living penguins date as being 8,000 years old. Now, I could not find in any literature, and I searched for 3 days, any study relevant to this claim, but it's quoted quite a bit on creationist sites, but there's no study linked to it. So I don't know where the fuck he's getting that, probably out of his ass. And this is another variation of the reservoir effect called the hemisphere effect. And basically, it's their food source based where they're located in the Arctic and stuff.
But
so,
those
yeah,
are all things that can be compensated for if they're known also. So
yeah, and that's the thing. We've known about the reservoir effect since the initial paper, which was the first one from Wakefield Dort. Or no, not Wakefield Dort. On the mollusk shells from 1963. Actually, before that, I think it was 49 or 59 is when the initial results came out. But they've known about it. We don't carbon date live things.
Yeah.
And one thing I had to find this because it was just killing me was this whole narrative by Hovind came from what they call the Miller's Tale. And I actually found the original, it's a reprint, and of all people, it's Hugh Miller's website. Do you recognize the name? He's worked with Mark Armitage, who was the CSUN University tech that, you know, the whole creationist living tissue or soft tissue on dinosaurs. And that's a whole nother debacle. But yeah, I found the original article where they he basically lied to get this sample and dated it and all this other stuff. And I'll throw that up there too. But it's like, I mean, it's like these people work in tandem.
You know, what's funny is while we were at that point in the debate, while I was with Kent Hovind, he saw the next slide coming up. I put it up, and you could see it in the lower corner or whatever, and you could tell he started to get really agitated. Then he was accusing me of changing the subject when the subject was carbon dating the fossils, which was part of it. But it was about the mammoth. And you know, for 20 years, he has made the claim that this part of this mammoth, you know, tested at another part of the same mammoth tested at a different age. And when you go back to the original paper, it was two different samples submitted 8 years apart or found 8 years apart wasn't the same mammoth. And even one of them, it even said that it had been coated with a preservative, the fossil tested, so that the results may not have possibly been accurate. But he saw that coming up, and oh my gosh, you could see him just squirming. I mean, he was just, you're trying to change the subject again. And it's like, no, we're still talking about carbon dating here.
He's the one that changed the subject.
And being that you've debated him, do you think he honestly believes this crap that he spouts, or is he really being deceptive for a specific agenda?
It's a really tough question, because I mean, we really can't speak for someone like that. I've had people write to me and tell me they don't believe he really believes any of it. I've also had other people, in fact, I just got a message today from someone encouraging me, another former young earth creationist, who says he really thinks that Kent does believe it. So I don't know.
See, I think it's
hard
both.
part. Yeah, the hard part is some of it is either really sloppy research or in completely not understanding, like what we were just talking about with carbon dating and with the mammoth results and the dating live animals. It's either totally, completely not understanding the process, or intentionally misleading people by publishing these results that were done back when it was being researched, and those things were published to show why we don't do that. But he's taking that and completely using that to completely represent what we do. So I don't know. Is he that ignorant? Probably not. I mean, you got to think at some point there, something's being built, something's being designed to give the impression that science is wrong, when if you went back and followed it and knew the whole story, no, science knew that was wrong. That's why they're saying not to do this. So
yeah, I from everything I've read and listened to and stuff like that, it's like it's so hard to determine whether he does actually believe what he says. But I think it's both, because I do think he has an agenda, beyond the whole creationist stuff. But it's just like, I mean, I've listened to some really good videos that I wouldn't cite as source, but they provide enough source material that you can go and look at the sources for yourself. And if you've watched enough of his videos, which I'm sure you have, and Deb, you can even attest to this too, and some of the stuff you've done, is that they never provide a proper citation. They give you just enough to make it look like, and then you got to spend hours looking for the actual paper or citation. And one of the things one of the YouTubers noticed is that even when he does give a citation, it's always off by a year or two. He puts the wrong date, the wrong title, the wrong author. Yeah, there's always something wrong with his citations, and that makes me think.
40 years old.
Makes me think.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he doesn't use it. Well, I haven't watched any of his more recent stuff, other than his quote little show he has on YouTube. Because, as I said, listening to him is like a brain killer. And but I know previously, before he went to prison, I mean, his citations were anywhere from 40 to 60 years old. I mean, in 1998, he was quoting 1963 textbooks. And if you know anything about the old publishing industry, your textbooks, even before you get them, are about 10 years old. 7 to 10 years old, because that's how long it takes from research to publishing to printing. But yeah, it's so hard to determine with him. Well, I just think he's slimy.
Well, what you were saying, Bill, about him accusing you of changing the subject, that was a load of projection. Because he kept trying to change the subject to other stuff, and the one that I found the most irritating is he tried to change the whole debate into a debate on the origins of morality.
Right.
And he tried that, what, 2 or 3 times, didn't he?
Right. Yeah. And again, I would just correct him and say, I mean, that's a subject for another day. We're not here to discuss the Bible, and we're not here. I mean, unless he's going to use it himself as that is his evidence. But we're not going to discuss that, and we're not going to discuss morality, the origins of morality, because that's a whole different subject.
Yeah. Well, and he's tying it, like his whole thing was, well, if you're just evolved from monkeys, he didn't say that, but that was the kind of thing. Well, how could you say anything was wrong? Like, inject some pre-supper into that, would you?
Yeah, he baited me pretty hard on that. I think he said something about my daughter or something at one point, trying to bait me into becoming upset and going down that rabbit trail. But I just corrected him again and kept moving. So.
Oh, we got Pluto Dog in the chat. Hey, Pluto, haven't seen you for a while. He's got a question. Does Hovind believe in Jesus and believe it's okay to lie to buttress his church? Does he lie for Jesus? I think almost every Christian lies for Jesus at some point, in some fashion. But I don't know. You guys think he believes?
Yeah, it's
Jesus?
hard to speak for others. Again, I mean, hard to say what he believes.
Yeah.
If he's a Christian, obviously he believes in Jesus. So,
I think so.
why he does what he does, if he thinks the end justifies the means, or the reasons he does what he does, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's his business.
Well, there is that for sure. So I would say that on the surface, it would certainly appear that he would have incentive to lie about those things, but we can't really say for sure whether he is or not. Because
I don't know how familiar you guys are with his son Eric, but he's one that I think is pretty transparent. I don't think he believes half of what he says.
And that would make sense because the two of them don't really seem to like each other much anymore.
Not anymore, no.
Yeah. And that would be a good reason for Kent to go off on his son, as if he doesn't believe, as the way Dad thinks he ought to. But yeah, Eric is pretty slimy. Speaking of him, is his video, his movie coming out today? Did you say?
Yeah, it's right as we speak. I think it's probably the first showing here, at least here in Mesa. So, it is definitely coming out today, released today with another limited showing on Thursday. I think few of them on Thursday are 3D. But there's 3D showings and 2D showings today, different places.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What's the title of the
idea
again?
of
Genesis
they changed it. It's Genesis 3D or Paradise Lost, isn't it?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and again, I think they missed an incredible opportunity there to do a movie about Genesis, about the Hebrew creation myth, if you want to call it that, and do it in 3D. But they chose to make it an anti-science movie. And it looks to me like Eric was really struggling with the funding at one point. And he went to see Ken Ham, and Ken Ham probably agreed to help finance or help distribute, help promote, whatever, the movie if they were able to participate. And all of a sudden, the focus went from making this movie a 3D story of Genesis to a 3D story of Genesis and a bunch of interviews with people that work for Ken Ham.
Yeah.
You know, and some of Eric's friends. Now, again, I'm speculating on that. I don't know if that's the truth, but in just watching the fundraising efforts and watching everything, right about the time he got funded is the time we started hearing it was only going to be partly a 3D movie with dinosaurs. The other part was going to be a documentary, basically, with a bunch of anti-science creation scientists and them attacking different parts of deep time, of evolution, etc.
And
In
Paul's
3D, I would hate to see kids subjected to Ken Ham in 3D. I think that would be
yeah, that'd be awful.
bad.
And I'm sorry, but have you ever seen a guy who is physically better evidence against his own claim than that guy? I mean, he looks like a Neanderthal.
A throwback, at least, yeah.
Sure, broke myself. But Paul's done some good videos about Eric's film Paulogia.
Paulogia video channel, yeah, he is amazing. And he's really taken on Eric Hovind, you know, as far as his Creation Today program. I know Paul's. There were a couple of episodes that I thought about doing something on, but then I check it out and pretty much Paul had already done it. So, you know, there's a great video.
I run into that problem.
Yeah, there's a great episode where Eric Hovind sets up an experiment for the Grand Canyon on his Creation Today show, and he had this goofy sidekick for a while, a younger guy, dark haired. He has his own ministry, but he came and went. You know, Eric has these friends that kind of come and go, like Cy and this other guy and whatever, and the guy from England that's in Washington now, whatever his name was, they kind of come and go. But they're standing there, and Eric releases the water. You know, he's piling the water up, and he's got this little bridge of sand there, and a whole bunch of sand, and the water starts flowing, and whoosh, it makes a Grand Canyon. It was a straight little line that opened up wide like that in one straight line. And Eric's going, see, it's just like the Grand Canyon. And I'm thinking to myself, you just proved that it couldn't have happened that way.
Yeah.
They don't see
it. The Grand Canyon just winds around and makes left and right turns, 90-degree angles,
like
totally obliterates.
Like a river would do that had been there for a very, very, very long time.
Following the natural grain of the land, it's like, okay.
And the Grand Canyon's not fucking made of sand either.
Right.
Oh man. But what I thought was intriguing with what Paul was talking about in terms of the video or the movie was Eric Hovind started, like, he had gotten his funding, like you said, from somewhere, who knows, and they got the movie made, and then he started coming out saying, oh, I need $300,000 to distribute the movie. Well, Paul worked in Hollywood. Paul has worked on some big name films. He is very, very well versed with how all of that works. And he did a video talking about Eric's claim that he needed all this money for distribution.
Yeah.
And basically is like, if somebody's asking you for money to distribute your movie, then you're being scammed. It's the other way around. People pay you for your movie that they can distribute for you because they want to make money off your movie.
Well, it shows the lack of interest, you know, when they did try to sell the movie. I mean, there must have been absolutely no interest there. It's the same with that Is Genesis History movie. You know, the theaters weren't going to take it on, so they had to, you know, put it out there and charge a high, you know, extraordinarily high ticket prices in order to finance just having the movie end up in theaters. So.
Well, one of the bits I read concerning the funding for distribution was that he was charging $19.95 for a movie that still needed to be distributed but was already done, and he was asking for donations, and for your $19.95 donation you got a you know, an already done movie, and it was basically to bump his numbers to get it into the theaters. And he was just trying to make it look like, oh, you know, here's a special thing. We have it done. We need to get it distributed. You know, it's just the whole thing was kind of backdoorish. It might even been Paul's video I got that from, because I've been watching a lot of him lately. But yeah, it's just I just find the dishonesty with, especially surrounding the creationists, so I think because it's relates to science in a sense that it's just so dishonest. It's like, you know, we were mentioning before the show, if you look at anything that Ham or Hovind or, you know, or Eric Hovind does, there is no science whatsoever. It's all opinion. I mean, what experiments they do is with garden hoses, or is Bill and I were joking, you know, about the sediments in a container of water.
Oh,
it's like that's not an experiment. I mean, it's like
I loved, when I was talking about having seen that Peter Sparrow guy here. This is going on 4 years ago now. One of the things that he had in his presentation, and again, this guy's from Australia, so one of an export in Australia is opals, and those are mined. Like that's a stone, you got to dig it out of the ground, and it takes millions of years to form, and they're quite lovely. And he had a thing in his presentation where, oh, well, this friend of mine, he figured out how to make opals in his backyard in 2 weeks. And he was showing pictures of these jars that had like layers of stuff in it, and one layer certainly looked like opal, but I'm sorry, you can't grow an opal in 2 weeks in a jar in your backyard. And he's like, oh, you know, this proves that, you know, millions of years is bullshit. Well, he didn't say that, but, you know, millions of years isn't a thing. And, you know, opals don't need any of that time to form. And so somebody's, and he anticipated somebody asking, because apparently this guy had made this discovery several years ago. Okay, so if this guy figured out how to grow opals like lickety split fast, and they were good quality, and you know, you couldn't tell that it was a new opal from a quote old opal, whatever, why is he not a billionaire, or at least a millionaire? And he anticipated this. He's like, so he decided that he wasn't going to sell his secret, though, because he knows that the opal industry is a huge employer in Australia, and he didn't want to put all those people out of work. So, but we're just supposed to believe that that's a thing and you can grow opals in your backyard. Oh. Yeah.
Crazy.
That guy, like I've said before, that guy was right out of the Ken Ham School of Stupid. Yeah, he had the whole picture of, you know, the creature with a cow body and a ostrich legs, and, you know, a alligator head and all of that shit. But I don't know how opals are formed exactly, but I'm pretty sure you can't grow them in your backyard.
Well, like you said, if you can, why aren't they millionaires, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Bill, can you grow opals in your backyard?
No, but you know, well, it's the same thing with you know, there was a guy in, I think, Washington State. They made petrified wood in a experiment where they, you know, heated things up to, I want to say, 1200 degrees. They had all the right things. They did this in a laboratory, and they came up with petrified wood. But that can happen in nature that way. In fact, the petrified wood, like we see here in Arizona, the petrified forest, all the different colors, you know, coming from different minerals, et cetera, that wasn't recreated in the lab. I mean, the guy made something that, you know, underneath the microscope looks like petrified wood in weeks or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it looks nothing like what we find in nature. You can't repeat those,
Well,
you know,
and
like that.
the unfortunate part of that is the average person will have never seen petrified wood in person. They won't have seen what an opal looks like in a mine. And so somebody who puts alphabet soup at the end of their name and says, "Oh, I'm a doctor," you know, they're more apt to believe that kind of bullshit because they don't know any better. And this person is coming with an air of authority, although it's misplaced. But that's how they get away with some of this stuff. You know, they prey upon people's ignorance and their ability to sound like they know something they don't, and that's how people get duped into believing bad things.
Speaking
right.
of lab,
Yes,
this is I think one of Bill's favorite topics. Mary Schweitzer. And as I said, this is a conversation I got my ass handed to me too. So I appreciate the inputs you've been putting in lately about Schweitzer's work. And 2 points you brought into the conversation were that creationists don't realize the soft tissue was encased in I don't know if you meant premineralized or permineralized bone.
Permineralized, yeah.
Okay, I'm like, I don't know that word. It
was fossilized.
And yeah, I knew that's what it meant, but basically, what was it, about 10 years ago? Found what we know as, you know, she termed it soft tissue. And this seems to be one of the biggest harping points I see in the group is that, you know, oh, well, she did it in a lab in 2 years compared to the supposed 70 million.
Right.
Why do you think that? I mean, as I learned, as I got my butt handed to me, that her work has been replicated. I did not know that at the time. I'm still reading up on it to try to catch up. Keep going back to, I mean, it reminds me of the H. pylori bacteria causing stomach cancer with all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
What is it with her study, with her work, that is so what's the word I'm looking for?
Attractive to them?
Yeah, thanks. That is exactly the word I was thinking of.
Okay. Right. Well, again, a lot of creationists don't understand that soft tissue is a type of tissue. It doesn't mean that when they found it, it was soft to the touch. Okay. And nothing has been found that was soft and stretchy to the touch when we found it. They've either soaked it in a weak acidic solution for weeks, or in the case of Mark Armitage, it was soaked for over a month in some kind of solution. You know, or at least for days, to get to any kind of a state of getting it back to where it would, say, be flexible. But what that's doing is it's removing minerals. It's removing things like iron. It's removing the minerals that were there to preserve it. Again, they don't seem to understand that soft tissue is a type of tissue. We've known about preserved soft tissue in fossils for years. I mean, but just not, say, preserved to the point where, like where Dr. Schweitzer found it. But it's you know, it definitely is something that they just cannot comprehend. I saw a guy today over and over. He just, in his mind, he cannot comprehend how it could last 65 million years. There's no way. Well, number one, it was preserved with a mineral. Iron's a mineral. We don't just claim that. We found the presence of it. And when you say her work has been replicated, I don't know that her experiments have been replicated in the lab. They may have been, but what we do find is, let's say, the 240 7 million-year-old reptile soft tissue discovered, and they published on it. The presence of iron was determined to be from hemoglobin. It was, determined to be present. It was determined to be the preservative. We've had fossils in amber where they've been extremely well preserved with soft tissue, 100 million years old or 99 million years old. Again, the presence of iron. There's been at least 4 studies done now, independent from Dr. Mary Schweitzer, that confirm the presence of iron as the agent for preserving these soft tissues. And the soft tissues, in the cases where these things are found, it's still unusual to find them in that state of preservation. But something is encased in amber. What's going to get at it? Something's encased in permineralized bone, fossilized bone. What's going to get at it? It doesn't have to. It's not exposed to the elements for 65 or 68 million years.
Right.
It is elements until it reaches a state of preservation. Now, Mary Schweitzer showed that it only took a few weeks to reach a state of preservation. Now, yes, it's only been a couple of years since that happened, but once it reaches a state of preservation and it is in basically a controlled environment inside of a bone that is fossilizing, and the bone becomes fossilized, it is like it's sitting inside of a rock. Yeah. So I don't see it. Something preserved sitting inside of a rock. I don't understand why they can't. The concept, again, they can't understand deep time, maybe because they believe the world is 6,000 years old, so they can't conceive how something could last 65 million years. Show me why it can't. Yeah. I mean, we've seen that it only takes weeks to reach a state of preservation.
Well, one of the things that for lack of a better word, amazes me about one, I mean, just in the last 2 weeks, the same Mark Armitage video clip they show of him, quote, supposedly winning his CSUN cage, which he did not do, and that's a whole nother story. It's been posted 5 times in the last 2 weeks.
Oh, and it's been posted. It depends on where, but it's constant. It's constant, and that is a flat out, outright lie. What is said in that video, and what they're what they're getting out of it. So, yeah,
and it kills me because in your patient responses, and I really give you credit for your patience, because I have to walk away because I get so pissed off. I'm like, seriously, dude, he just explained it to you, and you're asking the same fucking question.
I have had a couple of people actually do their research on that and change their mind. I had, I think one happened, 1 or 2 possibly in one of the Kent Hovind groups. There was another group where they posted this thing about Armitage winning his lawsuit. When I pointed out the facts and gave them actual links to the judge's decision in that, they actually came around and said, you know what, you're right. I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't check.
I've written extensively about the Armitage case, which is the lab tech. He's not a professor, and basically I came out with 2 conclusions, and basically I think he was a mole, because I'm sorry, a man with his credentials, what the fuck is he doing in a secular institution to begin with? I mean,
well, I don't think there's any question that he's probably good at what he does with a microscope. And is he qualified to install or teach about that? Probably, but that is as far as it goes, and that's all his job, to my knowledge, was limited to. Was they got a new microscope. They needed someone to explain to everyone how it worked and train others and introduce it to students, and he was a part-time temporary job.
It didn't help that Alliance Defending Freedom, and anybody who has listened to our show knows they're one of my favorite whipping boys. They are basically, this is what they do. His whole case really boils down to the fact it was a First Amendment case. It actually had nothing to do with the science, other than he puffed his CV. and he made some statements that I have cited on my website that pretty much shoots him in the foot, but it basically boiled down the First Amendment. And my personal opinion is, did CSUN handle his firing correctly? No. They made the mistake of mentioning his creationist viewpoints. Had they just let him go and not said anything about his religious views, they probably would have been in the clear. But ADF got a hold of it. And ADF, if you're not familiar with them, will milk a cow until there's no teats left. A cash cow for them, just as any of the religious freedom cases, the masterpiece cake debacle that's going up to the Supreme Court soon, if it's not already there. Kim Davis, although they weren't involved, Liberty Counsel was. They milked these cases to get all the fundraising they can out of it, and they basically, this is what they do. So they got a hold of him, because if you think about it, there was almost a 7-month gap from the time he was fired till the lawsuit was filed. Thinking, well, okay, if you think you were fired, why did you wait 7 months? And this is what ADF do. They go around the country hunting for these type of cases. They did it in Atlanta. They've done it with Stoltzman. They've done it. There's Phillips. They've done it with the Masterpiece. They did it with the Washington case. Well, that was Pacific Justice Institute. But that's their MO. So, I mean, Armitage's case really wasn't about the science, but they make it out that he won this whole big thing. And it's like, now CSUN settled because they didn't want to waste any more taxpayer money fighting this stupid red herring.
And 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5 charges were dismissed with prejudice before it was going to go to trial. In fact, it was established that CSUN had legitimate reasons for dismissing him, and that it was not based on his religion. I mean, that's right there in the judge's decision. It was also established that there would be no punitive damages on the remaining charges, and so the only thing he could do at that point is settle. Point, if he wins his lawsuit, he's not going to get punitive damages. So it was in the best interest of both parties to settle. And the amount, you know, it was triple digits, yes, but that is just not uncommon in a case like that. I mean, it costs so much to go to court and go to trial that I'm sure that had they offered less, he probably would have taken less. But he's still out there begging for money, you know. I mean, his most recent videos.
Oh, again, yeah, he's got
his GoFundMe account. Yeah, oh yeah, he's still out there begging for money. The $100,000 hundreds of thousands of dollars he got from that is not enough, and he has a dream, he says in his videos, and he doesn't like me very much at all. I kind of confronted him on the fact that he published in a semi-obscure journal. I mean, at least for publishing fossils, okay? But he published, along with someone else, he published on his Triceratops horn find and the osteocytes and that, but he didn't mention the age of the fossil, which is almost unheard of. If you're publishing on a fossil, to not mention the age of the fossil is almost unheard of. And when cornered on that, I mean, he kind of goes ballistic. He's like, well, you know, but he knows that had he mentioned the age of the fossil, his whole argument is out the window. But he's not going to get away with saying it's 4,300 years old and they died in a flood, and he can't publish that in a respected journal. So,
one of my favorite quips from Richard Dawkins was when he was speaking. It was a women's university that was near Liberty University. And so a bunch of people from Liberty had gone, and one of them said something to the effect, well, at my school, we have a dinosaur fossil that's 3,000 years old. How do you explain that kind of thing? And his reply was, if you go to a school where you have a dinosaur bone that's 3,000 years old, I highly recommend you find a new school. I love that.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to mention is, and I think a lot of people don't realize, because creationists like to always bring up, well, you're missing all these quote transitional fossils and there's gaps in the fossil record, blah, 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 blah. People don't understand just how rare an actual fossil is. Like, people don't, like, if you think about creatures that die now, like if an animal dies in nature, not hardly like none of them would be fossilizing hardly at all now. Very, 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 very few would ever have that happen. And the conditions are very specific that cause that to happen. So the fact is that we are highly unlikely to find a fossil of every creature that ever lived. That's just not going to happen, because vast swaths of creatures probably lived and died out and never fossilized once.
Mm-hmm. And we do see it happening. You know, a really good example of excellent fossils, had they been left buried, would be, like, say, what happened in Pompeii, with the pyroclastic flow there,
Right.
and the buried humans. I mean, if somebody were, we see it now and it's been dug up, excavated, etc. But if somebody a million years from now were to, happen along on that, I mean, that would be exquisite fossils. It would be amazing fossils. So, and there was no worldwide flood needed at all.
No.
I mean,
in fact, that would be arguably the opposite of a flood.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's not like every animal in history would, oh, well, this creature's died and one of them somewhere has to make a fossil so that we know it existed. Like, no, that just doesn't happen.
Well, 90% of the fossils we find are marine fossils, and that type of fossilization is occurring. We're just not on the bottom of the ocean digging up the bed of the ocean, but it's there, it's happening. Corals are being fossilized, things are being preserved. We're just not down there looking at those layers underneath the ocean to see it happening today.
Yeah, but it's that environment lends itself far more to fossilization than a mountaintop or
Sure.
regular ground. That and I also, like Kent tried to say, well, because you don't find a fully articulated skeleton, then that's a suspect that it didn't really fossilize because it didn't happen fast enough. It didn't die.
Yeah, I don't know. He actually was trying to make the case that most fossils are fully articulated or something like that. I mean, he was, and I was, saying, no, they aren't. I mean, it's very rare. It's actually very rare. I mean, during the process, things get separated, bones get moved, and predation occurs. All sorts of things can happen. And if it had all happened instantly in a flood, we would expect to see a lot more of that than what we do.
That would make sense, yeah. And you would see it all on the same. You would have this layer of like virtually everything fossilized, and then lots of layers with very scattered and sparse amounts of fossils, but we don't see that. That would make sense.
I have challenged Kent to do a second debate.
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see if it happens. He was asking that it be a live debate, and I got a hold of a local creationist organization here that has set up that type of thing. He wanted it at like ASU, and they have done not debates, but this organization had done. Had guest speakers come in, say from out of state, things like that, talk about creationism. This ASU organization, student organization, has since disbanded. So they are no longer around. They're not able to do that. I've written twice to the local atheist organization at ASU, and they're not even writing me back. I mean, they're just not even interested in it. I don't believe at this point. So, they just showing no interest. So, I don't think anything live at ASU is going to happen. If you want to go rent a room, it's going to cost thousands of dollars. So without getting a student organization involved, it would be kind of.
Now we've had good luck here with not debate per se, but with getting speakers in at public libraries that have auditoriums.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that could be.
Well, I think one of his requirements is it seats so many thousand people or something. So again, it's a restrictive. Yeah. But I mean, from what I've seen of his last presentations that have been filmed, I mean, there's one, I think it was in Texas. It looked like or was it Mississippi or something? It looked like there was possibly a dozen people in the audience. So he's no longer filling stadiums with thousands of people.
He's not a big draw anymore. I don't think he realizes that he's kind of past it. Because I watched a fair bit of YouTube stuff, and like you say, Paul's a fresh new face, and there's Godless Cranium, and a lot of different people that are doing those sort of rebuttal videos, and nobody's doing Kent Hovind.
Well,
not much. Yeah.
I think one of the points that was brought up, someone had asked, I think it was Logic, actually a couple of the YouTubers, was, why are you debunking old videos from Hovind pre prison sentence? And he said, because if you listen to his old stuff compared to his, quote, new stuff, it's the same.
Yep.
And not only is he the same, he has people, other minions that are mirroring his presentation. Not just his information, but his whole fucking presentation. So it's still relevant. I mean, there's this one dude, I can't think of his name. I think it's Bill Pendleton. Basically verbatim did a whole Kent Hovind presentation. I mean, he had his own words in there, but if you compare the two presentations side by, it was Hovind. He even made the same mistakes. So, and I think it's, as Logic said, it's important that we can combat this stuff, even if it's old, because it's still being used. I mean, and it's being used over and over and over again. If you debate Hovind again, though, could you ask him a question for me?
Sure.
How come he accepts the science debunking flat Earth, and he accepts the geocentric model, but he denies the science supporting evolution? Because I'd really like to know that. This man totally denies flat Earth, using science, mind you. But he accepts creationism.
Right. They're all, well, I think there's two types of flat earthers. I think there's biblical literalist flat earthers. And then I think, or maybe even three types. There's also people that are claiming flat earth for the sake of being argumentative, and maybe to prove that, that they can argue beyond the science or better than the science for the sake of arguing or whatever it is. And then I think there's the possibly atheists or whoever they are out there that are out there just, making fun of creationists by doing that, but yeah, there's different types, but yeah, I mean, it's, seeing the young Earth creationists debunking flat Earth is kind of hilarious, because it's, to me, they're just different levels of biblical,
stupid.
Different levels of biblical literacy, So
I'm a subscriber of. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's one of the points. This was from Arguing from Ignorance video. And basically, what he did is he had clips of Hovind denying flat Earth theory and the geocentric models of the universe. But as we know, Hovind claims to be a biblical literalist, and he accepts the Bible as being scientifically accurate. And I guess a lot of commenters were calling in and questioning him, because if you accept, the Bible does speak to flat Earth.
Yep.
I mean, and I don't have the verses specifically, but arguing from ignorance goes through this all. And I mean, he basically, it's hypocrisy. He's saying he's a biblical literist, but he's denying flat Earth, and it's right in the Bible.
Well, I mean, people do make the case it speaks for that. I would say that it only if you interpret certain things in certain ways, but there is more evidence in the Bible that the Earth is flat than there is that it is young. I'll say that, I believe, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
And genealogies are not used to date the Earth, and people never live to be 900 years old. So, young Earth has even bigger issues than flat Earth, but yet we see people cling to it because someone decided a few hundred years ago that this is the way we should interpret the Bible. And, if you're going to be a biblical literalist, you got to believe this. So,
yep.
Yeah. You're referring to the Usher chronology, for those of you that aren't aware. Well, that's one of them, but that's right. Primary one.
Well, I'm subscribed to a mailing list called Creation Moments, and they have a YouTube channel and shit, and their creation ministries and all this. And I laugh my ass off because I get every weekday, I get like a 2-minute recorded blurb thing from them about some idiocy they want to promote in regards to creation, and it's usually all wrong. And I have done recorded segments debunking some of their stuff before, but I laughed my ass off when I got the email that was where they were debunking flat Earth, and I was like, really? Come on, like, you guys have to believe that if you believe all this other shit. What's wrong with you?
The Creation Moments was one of the first Facebook groups I was ever kicked out of, I believe. So yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, a few years ago. They have their own groups and people. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, did they ever update their stuff? They used to send out the same. They had like 365 of them, and they send out the same one every day.
I think they're new. They have different ones because
for years they were the same. But I think within the last couple of years they've started some new ones again. But for a long time, in fact, that was I told you, I got involved in this or interested in it again in the 90s. That was one of the things that was coming out at that time was it would be so funny because what I started doing, there was a guy that would post in this one forum every day. He would post the Creation Moments thing. And so what I would start doing was to the one that he'd done the year before. And if you posted on something, it would bump it. So it would come back up and show again. And I would post like a little period and then bump it. And then I would go back in and delete that. But in the forum, it brought it back up. And all of a sudden he thought he was double posting because the one from the year before was the same one he had posted that day. And he couldn't figure out how this was happening. He was getting all flustered. It was one of the admins.
That's awesome.
Yeah, every single day he was posting Creation Moments, and I'd post the one from the year before and delete my comment, and he thought he was double posting. So that's how few they had. But that's one of the ways I got familiar with all those different arguments.
They seem to have
some of it ridiculous.
A team that finds new stuff, because I've been subscribed for 3 years now. And I've not seen any duplicates in 3 years.
Okay. Yeah, they used to have things like, scientists can't figure out how bumblebees fly, therefore God. It was crazy stuff. So
they actually have become a little more sophisticated than that, but not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. One of the first ones I ever did a debunk piece for, they were talking about a specific type of frog or toad in the rainforest, and they were going on about, so this I'm gonna say it was a toad, I don't remember, but So in the rainforest, when it's the rainy season, a lot of mud puddles form. And so they were talking about how when it's rainy season and a big puddle forms, all the female toads would congregate around the puddle, and all the males would know that if they wanted to mate, they just had to find a puddle and it would be full of females, and they could mate, and that ensured, really good procreation. And that was proof of design because God made it that way, blah, blah, blah. So I looked this up, and that particular toad had gone extinct in 1989. I was like, yeah, so God's design for procreation didn't work so well as you thought it would. So yeah, that was one of the ones that they did. That would be like 3 years ago, but yeah, they still come up with stupid shit all the time, and it's pretty irritating, to say the least.
Well, it's stupid shit that's already been debunked over and over and over and over and over again.
Oh yeah.
It's like,
and they were using sources from 20, 30 years ago. Studies
because modern science won't support their ideas, and a lot of the older sources are very difficult to get a hold of in some cases. I mean, as I said, there's one. I mean,
oh yeah, and one of the ones
they don't have an account.
One of the ones they did, Bill, it wasn't even to do with creationism per se, but they were arguing based on some antiquated study that people with tattoos were always criminals.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was like, I actually went to my Facebook and I got a whole bunch of people from my friends list to send me pictures of their tattoos, and I did a video. I was like, yeah, look at all these criminals, man. Like, yeah, it's ridiculous. And and they did their study based on people who were already in jail.
Oh, well, of course, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, I tell you.
Mind-numbing.
So Creation Moments they have a YouTube channel now, so you can go look at their bullshit in like video. Well, it's more like slides, but whatever. Yeah, just look it up sometime. I was dismayed to find out Ian what's his face is actually he's an expat Brit living in Canada. I was like, damn, can we evict him? Let's deport that guy back to the UK. So that sucks that you can't seem to get a live debate going, though. That would be fun to. Although,
yeah, it'd be interesting.
If it's in Arizona, I'm probably not going to be able to make it there. But yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, the two subjects that I'm most familiar with, I would say, throughout evolution debate is human evolution and the geology of Arizona. So, that's why we had talked about debating whether the Grand Canyon is evidence for a global flood or not. So, I'd love to do that. I have made my own discoveries and contributed to the science here in Arizona. So, in fact, I've got coming up December 9th, I will be at the Arizona Museum of Natural History in the theater there. That's a Saturday at 1 p.m. Going to be giving a lecture on the I found. I don't know if you knew about that, but I about 2.5 years ago, I was fishing up on the Mogollon Rim, just about 100 miles from here, northeast of Payson, Arizona. The Mogollon Rim is actually the southern end of the Colorado Plateau. It's where the Colorado Plateau's up here, and the rest of Arizona is down here. There's about a 2,000 to 2,500 foot drop right there, and it goes right across central to western Arizona or eastern Arizona, and northeast of Payson, there's some lakes up there that are actually like man-made reservoirs. They're real popular with fishing, and they're at about 7,500 feet elevation. So it's beautiful in the summer. I mean, I've been going up there with my children. Well, I moved here. I've lived here on and off since 1990, but I discovered it in 1990, and I've gone up there hundreds of times and dozens and dozens of times with my children when they were young. And I was fishing 2.5 years ago with my son, who was about 20 at the time, my youngest child. We looked down, and in the sandstone right in front of me were tracks, and they were actually faded, not real good examples of tracks, but you could tell, left, right, like that. I mean, you could see that that something had been walking, and it was preserved in the sandstone. So I went home and did some research about what I might find if I went back up there and looked for tracks. And it turns out it's 260 to 270 million year old coconino sandstone formed as a dry desert type formation. And what I found were like 260 to 270 million year old pre-dinosaur reptile tracks. And I went back and started looking for more. And that summer I had a lot of time off. I have my own company, and I do that in the summers on purpose a lot. So I had a lot of time off. I spent 2-3 days a week up there. I literally spent a couple hundred hours lake, and in one section where I found all the tracks, about a third of a mile, found 18 sets of tracks totaling, I mean, one set that I call a set is almost 100 tracks. So we're actually talking about several hundred tracks. And some of them were some of the best ever found of that type of track. 4 different, what they call ichnotaxon. That's instead of assigning a species to a type of track, they use that terminology. Types, some of which never been found in the coconino sandstone before. And we did the excavation this last summer, the beginning of August, with the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and the federal government. Also had 2 track experts from Brazil that came up for it. And we took out 5 sets of tracks and made casts and molds of a whole bunch of others. And so I'll be doing the presentation on that Saturday, really cool. December 9th at 1 p.m. at the Arizona Museum of Natural History. I'll have some others coming up too. Just to give you a quick example, I'll show you guys here.
Sure.
That again. Let's see, screen share. There we go. Here I am holding now this is one set, but what I call a set, but I mean, there were probably 45 tracks on that particular slab. What you're seeing here is the 4 that are just up from my hand, the real good tracks there. That's actually just the right foot of an animal. You can barely see these left foot tracks. That one appeared almost to be like he was cresting, walking along the top of a dune, but not up and over it, but along the edge of it. So he was, there were a lot of ripples and dunes in the sandstone at those points. And again, creationists will talk about this and say that all the tracks are going uphill and that it shows that they were struggling to get out of the water, running from a flood. We've done the analysis on this actual pieces of sandstone. Now, again, this is a plaster cast I'm holding, but we've done analysis on that sandstone. We know it's dry desert by the type of grains, the sorting of the grains, by the frosting of the grains. It was a dry desert environment, but where I did find these, it actually was an area which was shoreline a lot of the time. So that was kind of the neat thing. And if you actually do the geology, if you look at the geology for the area, a lot of that, what's really unique about that area is the Mogollon Rim, again, is right there. So we're talking within a mile of the edge, and I can go to the edge, and there's road cuts there, and look and see that you see sandstone, and then you see shale, and then you see sandstone, you see shale. Not like what you see in the Grand Canyon at all, where you see one layer and then you see another layer, and they're hundreds of feet thick. Here it was at the edge of this inland sea where the sea advanced and retreated many times. And so, that's just, again, evidence against the flood. It's kind of neat that I ended up stumbling on something like that because of my interest in talking about creationism. But yeah, I work with the New Mexico Museum because the curator there of paleontology is actually like the national authority on Permian footprints. So they're going to be on display in the museum, and it's neat. They said we excavated 5 different tracks, and we made the casts and molds of several others. So it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
That's pretty cool.
For sure.
Yep.
I know a friend of ours, Rachel Nannon Brown. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's paleontologist out of Texas, and I'm always jealous because she gets to work on mammoths.
Okay, yeah.
So
I've done some excavations on mammoths here. They actually have found mammoths right here, like in Gilbert, Arizona, just a few miles from where I live. There's a site east of Safford, Arizona, which is, I think it's around 30 million years. That one's, no, 20, that one's around like 22, 23 million years ago, I believe. But it's working with the Southwest Paleontological Society. I've gone on digs there, and I haven't actually discovered anything major, but I've been there when I, and heard the yells, so where there's somebody discovers like a mastodon, tusk sticking out of the side of a cliff there. So we've discovered some really cool things. A lot of turtles, big. They find a lot of that. It was an area that was kind of swampy at the time. So, but obviously some mammoths and mastodons wandered into there and got stuck. So
that's pretty awesome. It's such a fascinating thing. I mean, we were talking before. I got to go to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History a few years ago, and that was pretty amazing. And they've got the hobbits there. Now, I don't remember, are those actual fossils of the hobbit folk, or are those
they've found I believe 8 adult Homo floresiensis, and so we have, going back from say 700,000 years ago up to about 60,000 years ago, in the on the forest, all on the forest. We have evidence of their stone tools, we believe, the stone tools that are associated with them going up to about 50,000 years ago. So a little more recent than the fossils. But then once we see modern humans start in the fossil record there at about 50,000 years ago, we see no more evidence of Homo floresiensis or their tools. So it was pretty much in that instance, it looked like we replaced the native population. So the interesting thing about them too is, it looks like they were an offshoot probably of Homo habilis, or a very similar, slightly more recent ancestor out of Africa, and that probably left Africa, somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million years ago, and ended up in Indonesia. Now we know that Homo erectus, we find them as old as 1.5 million years ago or more in Asia. So it's not hominins to have left Africa at that time, but based on the traits, it looks like Homo floresiensis is shoot off of our human tree, and not a dwarfed, not something subject to island dwarfism as they thought possibly it might have happened before. So.
Right. Well, of course, we since we haven't actually met face to face, Bill. I'm only 5'1", so I get called Hobbit a lot. So.
Oh, okay.
When that came out, I had several friends. Hey, look, they found your people. Like, fuck off.
Yeah, I get that too.
Well, it's about that time, folks. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. So, Bill, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Was Lots
Thank you. And if
of
you haven't, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I don't put out a video every week, but I'm getting better at it. And I also have a website, creationsciencefiction.com, that I've been working on. It's kind of a work in progress, but lots of things on there about the most dishonest of the dishonest creationists, I like to say. So.
And they tend to be a pretty dishonest bunch for the most part. Like I said, a lot of lying for Jesus going on. That's great. And do you have a Twitter or anything you want to?
I'm on Twitter just as Bill Ludlow, yeah. Or look me up on Facebook as Bill Ludlow. So
yeah, he's my Facebook friend, so he's not that hard to find. And he does show up on the Great Debate community from time to time.
Right. Yep.
Awesome. And I'm jealous of both of you. I know Deb didn't catch this, but you guys have Mary Schweitzer as a member of the Great Debate community. I was like, when I read that, it was like a week or so ago, I was doing some background stuff, and I was like, oh, man! Because I really do like following what she's done, and I'm woefully behind, but
yeah,
still pretty cool.
Completely missed that because I was feeling pretty miserable last week, so unfortunately I wasn't doing a lot of reading of anything, but it's a good little community, I gotta say. We got some pretty cool people in there. Yep. Some are known, some aren't, and that's okay because they're all pretty good. And I get to talk to people that I wouldn't normally get to talk to, that believe things that I wouldn't normally get to talk about. So there's that. At least not outside of the free for all that is a Facebook group. Beth, where can we find you?
Easiest way is on Twitter, Dune998. That connects to my blog, Havoc and Chaos, as well as leads to my Facebook, which is Beth A. Hambridge, and I'm also on YouTube under the same name. I haven't put anything new out yet lately.
And you can
but that's the easiest way.
You can also find me on Sunday mornings at 12:05 a.m. on Holy Crap, the Vlogcast, hosted by the Shujin Tribble, where we talk about anything and everything secular with our motley crew of panelists that go from Paris, France to, well, here, Ontario, and parts in between in America. And that's, as I say, every Sunday morning at 12:05 a.m. Weird time because we're trying to compete with the woo that is Coast to Coast Radio. Because, hey, if we don't, who will? So there's that. And as always, we like to mention the Taylor Scholarship over at the Whitefields Educational Foundation. Whitefields provides counseling for people who are leaving or have left religion. And the Taylor Scholarship provides that counseling free of charge to people who need the counseling but are unable to afford it. So if you need somewhere you'd like to donate for charity, we highly recommend those folks. That was started by David Michael of the My Book of Mormon podcast. So the URL is whitefieldseducational.org/My Book of Mormon podcast if you would like to donate. And we do have a Patreon as well. We use that to pay for our hosting every month. So if you feel like throwing us a buck or two, that would be greatly appreciated as well. So, and again, Tracy and Morgan hopefully will be back with us next week. Life gets in the way, which is why I have multiple co-hosts, because you never know. And I've had to host by myself before, and it can be fun, but not always. So there's that. So hopefully we'll see those two next week. Of course, Tracy is the Godless Mama. You can find her blog under that name. And Morgan is also found on the Biskeptical podcast with Trav Mamone. You can find that every other week. And she also is on Twitter at Mo String, not no string, because we shouldn't be tweeting that person anymore, whoever they are. And so, until next week at the same time, same YouTube station, we will see you then. And until then, we will leave you with our good friend Dave Foda's Human Creed for Mankind, and we will see you then.
Thank you for having me.
I know the truth and power of reason and of rational thinking, and I will use them to my advantage. I know the truth and power of educating myself and of expanding my intellectual boundaries, and I will educate myself. I know the truth and power of vanquishing ignorance, and I will do so whenever the opportunity presents itself. I know the truth and power of morality without supervision, and of true and accurate righteousness. I know the truth and power of obliterating tyranny, be it intellectual, emotional, or philosophical, and will work toward that goal whenever and however possible. I know the truth and power of human ingenuity. I know the truth and power of human compassion, and I will be mindful of the welfare of others. I know the truth and power of equality and fairness for all living things. I know the truth and power of the importance of our families, our friends, and our fellow men and women. I know the truth and power of human stewardship of our lands, our waters, and our skies, and I will try to act to preserve our environment. I know the truth and power of the sciences of mathematics, of physics, and of chemistry, and of the important role of these disciplines in understanding the workings of this cosmos. I know the truth and power of the rejection of all notions or beliefs that reside in the supernatural or the superstitious, and of those notions or beliefs that we are not supposed to be able to explain. And I know that these rejections are necessary for humankind's survival. I am a human being with a free mind, liberated from irrational influence and from unreasonable dogma.